When the student is ready, the teacher appears. Join me in my second conversation with Dr. Alauna Curry, trauma psychiatrist, as she helps us to upgrade our mental health and learn skills to heal. She's the skills over pills doc, and she starts off by talking about the trauma cure, its creators using radical
It's
empathy.
virtual. It's 3 days of learning with me where we go through all six of those brain systems and then the prefrontal cortex. We talk about how to activate it. I give you exercises. We practice in real time. We do skill building. So when you leave those 3 days, you have been exposed to all of the tools that you need. And then it's a matter of trying to implement them.
And so we are going to pick up where we left off, designing a end of life plan, communicating with an advocate, and having a conversation with your circle of support really can help us to create empathy, which we talked about a whole lot, and avoiding those conversations. First of all, just being vulnerable enough to have those conversations. It helps us to have tough conversations when things are calm in our life, when things are settled, when situations are just scenarios we're making up to give us an idea of how we would respond in case something really happened. It's much harder to make those decisions during a crisis when your loved one could be incapacitated in some way. Family feuds start that. And so, Dr. Alana, I want to hear from you. Why do you think it's so hard to talk and as you mentioned yesterday, to talk and think about death and dying? And how do we change our stinking thinking regarding the death and dying and our end of life planning?
As you mentioned, stinking thinking is an acronym, and it stands for our primitive brain and how much fear and anxiety it can create. And because our bodies don't really like that sensation, we engage in avoidance about things that is uncomfortable to us. And one of the things I think we need to understand is that being strong is not just about being able to physically lift, toss, or throw something, or even to intimidate a thing into doing what you want it to do. Emotional vulnerability and the ability to overcome emotional intensity in order to accomplish something is actually a huge strength, right? People who can do hard psychological and emotional work are going to demonstrate themselves to be some of the strongest people because it's what's needed right now. And so, one of the core elements of being a human is that we live and we die. We know that.
Yes.
And many of our belief systems give a lot of service and talk to the soul, the spirit, and what we believe about an afterlife. And there's a lot of fear conversation about what the afterlife and what it would look like in that space. And so if we pile on the thought process about it could happen to us, it could happen to a loved one, whatever we might be worried about, we all have a ton of negative thoughts and things going around in our heads when it comes to thinking about end of life. But the reality is that, and this also goes together with trauma, a lot of times they don't teach us to think about the death of a loved one like it has to be something horrible or unexpected in order for it to be traumatic, but that's not necessarily the case. There are some times where even if it's expected or a person has lived many years or there's all these other factors going on, it can still be really hurtful to the family who loses the loved one, whether or not it's a chaotic or sudden death or not. Right. It's so we have to stop of trying to avoid pain and avoid bad things and negative sensations, and instead figure out how to embrace those things, because having those uncomfortable conversations now helps prevent the blow-ups later. I have family members that I was just kind of laughing to myself the other day, like, we get along great 99% of the time, but when we're talking about estate planning and people passing away, that's when folks get funky. Yes. Right. Yes. So yes. I think it's always important to recognize that we don't as individuals, we don't have every single tool that we need to do everything in this life. And it's important to pay professionals and other people who do these things on a regular basis to help us get through it, right? And a lot of times we're coming in, we talked recently about skills, right? In the last one.
Yes.
And when we lack a skill, it's important to find someone who can teach and model that skill for you, right? Because many of our families maybe showed us something we didn't want to do. And now we have a deficit that we need to develop. So I know, me personally, I don't know all of the ins and outs of estate planning. So that's when we as a family have to say, hey, let's invest in someone who can sit down and walk us through this, because a template and instructions, and then we can follow those things, right? It can actually be fun to talk about what you'd like your end of life services to be. I think one of the things we can do is really begin having these conversations with more of a thought towards celebrating life versus mourning death.
Yes.
And, I think we will find ourselves just in a better position to make a plan. So I think we all kind of can do better in this space.
Even if you are not making the step to have a conversation with an attorney, it's so important to just talk to your family members, to give them an idea of what you're thinking, what your wishes are.
My favorite tools is called Dear Man, and I'll share the acronym because I think it's a helpful tool anytime you have to have a difficult conversation. And the structure of the information also helps it to come across better to the other person. The D is describe the facts of the situation as objectively as possible. So this is, really trying to use wording that you and the other person could agree on the description, right? Yes. And that is thinking carefully about how to present this to the person, just so that you can establish that you all are talking and thinking about the same thing. The E is express your feelings and opinions in I statements. I think, I feel, I believe. And this is important because many times when we're trying to talk to other people, we have a tendency to make you statements. Mm-hmm. And when you make you statements, you trigger other people's amygdalas. They get defensive, yes, right? Yes. So keeping the conversation centered on what you feel, think, and believe, and what your emotions or opinions are about in as succinct of a format as possible, right? We're trying to use as few words as possible to communicate to the other person what you believe they need to see in this situation, especially paying attention to the emotions. The A is assert what you want or the boundary that you're setting. And this is making yourself crystal clear. Many times when we're communicating in emotionally intense circumstances, we have a tendency to not be clear about what we're asking of the other person, or think that they should just know, right? We all grew up together. You should understand what I'm saying. We do a lot of mind reading and assumptions. So the A is about making it very clear what you're asking of them. Mom, dad, let's think about where a facility could be now that you could stay in if anything were to happen and you're not able to take care of yourself on your own. We can have you close to home, but something that we can all afford, and have all of that worked out before things turn sideways. That way, everyone feels like they're part of the decision making, and people don't feel as resentful or manipulated as it may feel if those decisions start having to be made for them, right? The A again can also be setting a boundary, right? Saying, this is a clear boundary in what I am unable to do. I'm unable to afford to do X, Y, Z. So I have $2,000 and this is the amount, just as an example, this is how much I will be able to contribute, and I am unable to do more, period, right? And then the R is reinforcing why the other person would want to do what you just asserted. And so that's an important part that people often leave out. And this is the part that really makes you think about the situation with more empathy. Like, what is their motivation? Why is what I'm asking or what I'm asserting important for both of us, because if you take a little bit of time to think about it, you often can find that middle ground that even though both people may not agree on it, well, we might think right is two different things, but effective is usually, we can identify that and we can walk that path no matter how we feel about it internally, right? So Dear Man is a strategic way of activating your own prefrontal cortex, to that more evolved part of our brain that can help us get past that shitty primitive thinking that makes us react to things, versus being able to really look at it and dissect what we'd like to create. So I love giving the Dear Man tool, and I teach it even more in depth in all of my programming.
That's really great. And you just really described what a death doula does. We work with people to help them to develop that circle of support, to understand the importance of developing those healthy systems and learning how to be vulnerable and learning how to trust. Because in order to designate someone to make your healthcare decisions, you've got to have a baseline of trust. You've got to have some type of trust.
Yeah, I think people are in some ways afraid to talk about their health in general, even beyond doing end of life planning. There's a lot of families who are just getting to the point where they are discussing some of the generational difficulties of the body and the mind. And I think that it's important for us to begin to recognize that understanding our parents' health and understanding our family health structure can really help inform our own health choices. So it's, end of life planning really doesn't just start at thinking about the retirement, the funeral plan, and those type of things. It really is about how do we live our life as healthy as possible, right, so that we can be successful getting to some sort of decent looking end of life. But that's a challenge in a society that's bombarded with stress, with unhealthy food choices, with addictive substances, with sedentary lifestyles and behaviors. So I think it really starts with us being willing to talk about like how our bodies are supposed to run, yes, to have more conversations about healthy nutrition, dietary choices, eating, more vegetables and having more balance of fibers and nutrition. And yes, we can eat meat, but we also need to be thinking about the toxin loads in our bodies. So, I think it's also, there's so much trauma that has to heal when you're talking about people letting go of these things, because it also goes to the diets that we choose. Our taste buds are still very informed by the culture that we've had, where we've had to make the worst parts of the animal taste great, which we've done, yes, right? Did very successfully. Yes. We make stuff taste good. However, the seasonings, the salts, the butters, the oils, the things that have made those things taste great also have consequences in our body that are beginning to accumulate and show us that, okay, we need to really rethink our health in a overall strategy. Yes. So I just think end of life really is an interesting concept where we can wrap this whole thing and let's restructure our lives. COVID has shown us that the way we were doing things is not healthy, and I don't want to go quote back to anything. Exactly. I want to evolve new things that help us to live an overall healthier society as an individual and a human race and community. Yes, we got to think about our whole life. We got to be able to sit still, as you stated, and really listen. Because our evolved mind is there to help guide us. And if we're stuck with that primitive mind guiding us, then we never reach a point where we're able to be still and really consider our past. As you stated in our first conversation, we are all connected to everything else. Our body systems are connected. You mentioned that we're all trying to reach that balance, right? Our body is constantly trying to get that homeostasis.
it always is trying to reach that balance. And that's what well-being is all about. And that's, the whole reason for these discussions is to help people to think about different aspects of their life. And so, can you suggest tools? I know you've mentioned being still, and so meditation is very important to me. And can you share other skills um, or tools that people can use to really calm themselves from the inside out, to connect with that more evolved part of themselves or their brain?
Well, what I will do is I will share one of my favorite skills. Like I said, I'm a skills over pills doc. I believe
Excellent.
that having acronyms helps you to remember to use certain steps and strategies to help dissect the situation. And I teach more about this in the Trauma Cure, but I also have a small group coaching program called the Recreate Trauma Recovery Coaching Program. And there we go, even more in depth over 12 weeks. And, I also provide community and accountability so that people can, really start to hold themselves into a new mental strategy. So it's the love skill. The love is empathy in action because it is not easy to use empathy. In fact, it's damn hard
Yeah.
because the animal version, the primitive version, is the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth thought. And most of the time, it's the programming and it's the things that come out under stress that are leading the way in how we're responding. So the L is listen and look with suspended judgment, recognizing that none of us have a full picture of another person and what they're going through or dealing with, just like, even the people closest to us that we live in the same house with every day, we don't fully understand their entire internal experience. It's not even possible. So assuming that we know everything about a situation just based on our own narrow interactions with other people would be foolish. So, listen and look with suspended judgment. The O is observe the emotions in yourself and the other person. The emotions are very hidden right now because we have not developed our vocabulary in doing so. The V is validate. Validation is not agreement. Validation is just being able to get enough information so that you can say, you know what, I understand why you think of it like that. And that's actually really important, an important process. And then the E is to express yourself skillfully, creator, because that is what we are. We are creators. Yes. And there's no such thing as doing nothing. Every time we open our mouths, every time we're interacting with other people, our brain is producing thoughts. Those emotions those thoughts are producing emotions, and those emotions are a part of our actions. So, I believe that love skill is really core to being able to remember to use empathy in real time.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. I want to say this conversation has been so extremely encouraging for me. It's been eye-opening, and I really, again, I have said this maybe, a lot, but I really appreciate the learning, the opportunity to have this conversation with you and to help us all to understand a bit more about our brain and our clutter and how the trauma and the clutter there's a connection there. Everything is connected. You've helped us to see that as well. I am looking forward to learning more. I'm very excited about the opportunity to go deeper.
In the Trauma Cure, we will go deeper on day one into how to identify our emotions and develop the language that helps us understand what's going on and communicate with other people effectively instead of fighting, fussing, arguing, cussing, or shutting down. And so part of the participants that come to the Trauma Cure, which also the Cure is an acronym, it stands for Creators Using Radical Empathy. It's going to be on March 9th through 11th, and you can get your tickets at thetraumacure.com. That's one of the many things that we do in that program is really going deeper into how to develop our emotional intellect so that we can be on the front lines of the healing and recovery that's needed in our society. So I hope to see you there. And follow me on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn at Dr. Alauna, DRALAUNA, Dr. Alauna, trauma psychiatrist.
Thank you again, Dr. Alauna. You enjoy the rest, excuse me, you create a great